Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host. And today I'm pleased to welcome Bruce Paterson as our guest. Bruce, you're back in the guest chair for a second time, and it's great to have you here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here, Keith. It's been quite a while. Lots happened since then, and we've got lots to talk about.
Yeah, so I wanted to catch up on what you've been busy with, and I know you're prolific when it comes to your artwork and your social media pages and so forth. Bruce, just before we get into chatting about some of your projects, let's just find out who you are. So who is Bruce Paterson?
Bruce Paterson is a 76-year-old ex-teacher who has done all kinds of stuff, traveled the world, and I'm a scuba diver, and I have this endless admiration for nature and the out of doors and beauty. I love beauty in nature. I love beauty in the human form, and my art expresses that.
Okay.
Yep.
I know you told me that originally you were trained as a biologist.
That's true.
And then you went into the teaching profession. Where did you teach?
Oh, that's a good story. I taught in my first job. I didn't know where it was, but I took it without even knowing where it was. It was in Cassiar, up by the Yukon border.
Okay.
And I was there up there for 4 years, and it was an asbestos mine, a company town, and I realized that I needed to move on. And luckily enough, I was talking to a friend who had just gotten a job in the Kootenays, which is where I wanted to be. And I said jokingly, well, next time you talk to the principal, see if there's a job in math or science. Well, it turned out next week there was, and before I knew it, he said, he's going to give you a call, and I got the job in Crawford Bay. I didn't even know where Crawford Bay was, but I'm so glad I took it because the rest is history. It was just lovely.
Right. How long were you a teacher at Crawford Bay?
I was there for 8 years, lived in Boswell, and this is when I got this notion to do these sketches and articles for the little paper, the Kootenay Review. Alvin Dunick was the fellow that started it. He was a fellow teacher and a marvelous fellow, and he really did a great job, and it really took off. And he confronted me and said, hey, what about doing an article about local history? Because I know you do a lot of sketching. And I said, great. So I came up with Kootenay cameos that night, and I did it for 10 and a half years every month. I don't know how I did it because, boy, it was pretty demanding.
So that led to the publication of a couple of volumes of Kootenay cameos as well?
Yeah, I did that later. I did many things before I got to that, but I spent all my time when I lived there. I would spend every weekend taking the first ferry across with my trail bike in the back of my van, and I'd be in Caslow, and I'd be on a trail somewhere between Caslow and New Denver, get the bike out, and I'd go up some new trail. I've been up every trail from Caslow to New Denver, into the Cirques, into the surrounding country. Absolutely fascinating. And in those days, we're talking about early, middle 70s, 80s, there was so much stuff around, so many buildings, it's just everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
So that really fascinates me, Bruce, because I published a book last year called Abandoned Kootenays, and I went out and took pictures of old barns, old buildings, old cars, old trucks, etc. And I credit the inspiration of that book to what you do.
Oh boy.
Except I admire the fact that you actually do the sketches. So how is it that you combine the passion for the Kootenays with your artwork?
It was so obvious. I was knocked out by the amount of effort that people put into their projects and what they put up with. When you look at and imagine what was there when they arrived, there was nothing there. There were no roads. There were no ways of getting around. Even the railway hadn't gone through yet. And the first thing that opened things up a little bit were the paddle wheelers. And then they punched the CPR line through, and that opened everything up. But up until then, boy, you had to slog it.
So, Bruce, when you come across these historical finds, could be a building, could be a barn, how do you approach that so that you're going to represent it or sketch it in perspective and make it come alive?
Yeah, I have to look into the history, so I do a lot of research when I take a lot of pictures because when I'm doing these pen and ink drawings, I mean, they take days to finish. I mean, I can't sit there and do it. I've got to take a picture and then work from the pictures. And then, depending on the background and the interest, I mean, there are so many places that have wonderful stories, just amazing stories.
So isn't that true throughout the Kootenays, that there's all these amazing stories? And that's one thing I really admire about your work, Bruce, is that if you hadn't taken the time to capture those, many of those images, many of those stories would be lost forever. So does that make you feel good that you're able to contribute to?
Absolutely, yes. And here's another important point about this also. I cannot believe the number of structures and buildings that have disappeared since I've done it. You know, even I'm thinking of the art gallery out in Serdar. Kootenay, sorry. A mudslide took it out. A beautiful building, and it was being used by an artist, and it should be there still, but it got taken out, and a lot of places have burned down. Especially in Ainsworth, the museum there burned down, and the Tin Cup Cafe in Sandon burned down. It's just amazing how
So when
things
we
change.
lose those pieces of history,
They're gone.
we lose them forever, don't we?
Exactly.
Yeah. And again, that's really what I appreciate about your artwork, is that you save those memories for us and tell the stories. Because every building that we see, every structure has a story to it.
Absolutely.
And there's some connection to the human value
it's
to that as
endlessly
well.
fascinating. Coming up here, I drove through Moye. I drew the Moye Fire Hall, you know, and it's got a wonderful history.
Right.
And there are so many amazing places in the Kootenays.
Right.
And they're so unique.
Right. So you've got lots of diverse interests, Bruce. So,
I do.
So not only
I'm the luckiest guy in the world, I got to say.
Not only do you sketch historical buildings and artifacts and so forth, but you also capture the essence of the area through sort of some of your interpretation when it comes to producing books. I understand you worked with Chris Luke recently. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yes, that's right. Chris approached me. Chris Luke was the chief of the Tanaha people in Creston, in the area, in the Creston Valley. And he approached me to do a book he wanted to do on Yakanuki, the little place, their little center there. It's a beautiful spot with tremendous amounts of history. It's been there since the turn of the century and beyond. And I'm so proud and privileged to have been asked to do that. And I think he was pretty pleased.
Right. So you collaborated.
He said I was kind of slow, but it's the nature of the beast, you know, because all that pen work takes time.
Right.
Yeah.
So you also were a cartoonist, I understand. And that I get the impression that maybe that was one of your favorite gigs.
Yeah.
Tell us about
well,
that.
what happened was when the little paper folded, the Creston Review, it was sold to somebody in, forget now, in Nelson. And I had to do something else. And so it just, the timing was amazing. There was a little advertisement in the Creston Advance, and it said, looking for a cartoonist. And I was the only person that applied for it. And it was really quite neat. I did over 400 cartoons, and they came out twice a week. I don't know how I did it. I was teaching full time. I had a family, and you know, doing all this other stuff too. And but it worked out great. It was such a lot of fun.
So give me an idea. What were some of the inspirations for your cartoons?
Oh, anything. It could be something federal, provincial. You know, I even did one with what's the American president, Clinton. I had that little faux pas with what's her name? You know who I'm talking about. And I did one of that, for example. And, but you know, I would talk about little incidents that happened in the community, and do little cartoons. It was a ton of fun. I did that for 5.5 years. So but meanwhile, I'm doing all this other stuff as well.
Right. Okay, you also do some fantasy art as well.
Yes, totally.
So just tell me about that.
I am absolutely, I'm not going to use the word blessed, but I am. I have this amazing imagination. I've always had it. And I've been able to use it in just about even when I was doing this stuff, it was really good, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the fantasy art, again, where do you draw your inspiration?
Just love of nature, the curiosity of what this is all about. I find it endlessly fascinating. I still believe we're in somebody's game, but that's something else. Mm-hmm. And it's, I just love the human form and how we deal with each other. Mm-hmm. And
well, you bring the human experience alive.
Oh, it's so important. Yeah.
So why do you think the Kootenays is somewhat unique in that we have a wide array of stories? There's a fair bit of history, though in comparison to, say, Europe or whatever, it's pretty contemporary history. Yeah. But it's colorful history in many cases.
Very colorful.
As well.
Yeah.
Can you just maybe talk a little bit about why you like the history of the Kootenays?
Oh, it's all kinds of things have happened here. I was just looking at, there was a little monument, and I lived in Boswell for 8 years, as I said, and I wasn't aware of a little monument down the straight stretch from where I lived. And Tom Limbury had helped, he ran the store in Grey Creek, had helped put it together over the years before I arrived. And I wasn't aware of it, but it was to commemorate the life of Henry Rose, who was the last person to be hanged in Nelson. Okay. And the story behind that, you could do a movie out of it, because there was a group of them that obviously there was drinking involved, and somebody was killed, and poor Henry Rose was accused of it, and he absolutely denied ever having done it, and to the last moment. And he never fought over it. He just said, it must be God's will. He wants me to die, I'm going to die. Right. And you look back on the evidence now, and it's really questionable about his partner. Right. Anyway, it's interesting. All these stories, there's so many of them.
The Kootenay story, for sure. Yeah. One time I was at the courthouse in Nelson, and I noticed in the back
I've drawn it.
The gallows.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
So,
yeah, I rest my case.
Yeah. So again, just sort of illustrating the colorful history of the Kootenays, and thank you for documenting that and capturing
I
much
spent
of that.
a lot of time in Nelson, and I was starting to do a series of houses, some of the beautiful, stately houses, homes that there are in Nelson. I must have done 6 or 8 of them, and really interesting histories behind them. They were there since, even before the turn of the century.
Well, some time ago we had a guest from Nelson, and that was sort of the theme of his book. He had gone around the city and sort of captured photographs and stories of the architectural beauty of a lot of the buildings in Nelson. It was quite fascinating. Bruce, in your spare time, I understand you also do a little bit of scuba diving. What experiences have you run into there?
Oh boy. It's funny. While I was doing the Kootenay cameos early on, I was at Prince Charles Secondary School. Sorry, you're not allowed to use that name anymore, but I'll always call it that. But anyway, it was a chance to take scuba diving courses there, and I took advantage of it. And I got my ticket, although there's a story in itself, because I could never clear my face. But when I had to do it, I did it. And I can remember it was in the West End, just across from Balfour. It was pretty deep and dark. And we were diving down on a barge, and we were all gathered around this 45-gallon drum, and the instructor would say, "It's your turn." And I'd have to crack my mask and flood it, and then, blow the water out with the air. And I couldn't do it, but I did it that day. And some of the dives I've done. I've dived from Sirdar all the way up to Ainsworth. I've done Moy Lake many times. One of the most interesting ones I did was in Boswell, because when I lived there, I got to know a little boy who was in my class, and he kept showing me these wonderful bottles that he would find off their property on Kootenay Lake. And so I thought, that's the place I want to go and dive. So I did, with my buddy, and we went out clean as a whistle, not a thing for miles. We were coming back in, and I just happened to look down. We were in about 30 feet of water, and there was a crate right on the bottom. So we went down and investigated, and lo and behold, there was this crate. It had dropped, and over the, I don't know how many years, the sides had fallen off it. The bottles toppled over. They were exactly the way they were when they fell. I'm figuring between either 1914 or 1917. I could go by what the bottles were, how they were made, the ridges and the lines in them, how the neck was added. And so that's very interesting. Anyway, so we brought everything in, and there were 3 bottles full of cognac from France. And I've still got one left.
Still sitting on your shelf.
Yeah.
Well, that's a keepsake for sure.
Yeah.
Again, illustrating the colorful stories of the Kootenays.
Yeah, exactly.
So have you dove down and found some of the wrecks?
Yes, and there are many barges in the lake along the east shore, and we found many of them doing as many dives as we have. And in those days, the barges were taken up. I don't know how it happened, but they were feeding the boilers in the Pilot Bay smelter. And I guess some of them sank in the storms. And we found quite a few, and you can still see the coke or whatever it is they were carrying.
Right.
Yeah, amazing.
So, yeah.
One of my favorite stories is diving off Crawford Creek, because Crawford Creek runs through the golf course. And there's a tee there where you tee off, and most of the balls go right in the water.
I've been there.
And they go down. Golf balls are really interesting. They don't sink and they don't float.
Okay.
They're sort of neutral, and they bob along. And when we dove at the mouth of Crawford Creek, it was very deep. We went down 120 feet, which you're not really supposed to do when you're just an ordinary diver. But you'd look out, it was dark, but you see it white as far as you could see. And they were all golf balls. I remember one day we packed up 5 bags of golf balls. It was unbelievable. Unfortunately, before the internet, or otherwise we would have sold them.
Brought to you by Callaway, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or Titleist.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I just want to ask about your recent projects. I'm always interested when I talk to someone that has taken the time to put together their artwork in a book or a calendar. Just what the motivation is and the sense of accomplishment when you do it. So can you just talk a little bit about why it makes you feel good when you're able to capture these various things, images, and your own artwork? Yeah,
it's a chance to explore some ideas. I'm a very fanciful fellow, actually, and I just try out different ideas and explore different ways of looking at things. I've created worlds and creatures, and I sculpt too.
Just tell me a little bit about your sculptures.
Yeah. I've done everything from comic book characters, little figures.
What medium do you work in?
Clay.
Yeah.
Yeah, clay. So I sculpt them and then fire them and then glaze them.
Right.
And I've got 2 kilns on my deck, so I've got all the stuff I need. And I can't believe how many I've done. It's just amazing.
Well, when I first met you, and I'd followed your work for years before I had the pleasure of meeting you, and that was at the Crescent Farmers Market.
Yes.
And you had a pretty impressive display there, Bruce. A lot of your artwork, some of your big images as well.
Yeah, I had 2 tents, and they were united with my signage. I had 2 spots, and I just filled it. It took me 3 trips to set it up, and took me 3 trips to take it down.
Right.
And I would have to start about 6 in the morning, and but it was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
You never knew who you were going to see.
Right.
I would see ex-students that had grown up with families, and I'd always give them a hard time. Oh, you finally grew up, eh? But it was cute. It was really fun.
Yeah. So I want to go back to your educational days when you were working as a teacher.
Yeah.
And the natural conclusion would be you were an art teacher, but that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I was science and math, as I said, and did that all through my career. And in the last 4 years, the administration said, hey, we need another art teacher. We know you do art. And so, I would be teaching by 12 and doing a lab, and then finish that and go down to the art room and do some art on a Friday afternoon. It was just great.
So sort of the best of both worlds.
Amazing. Yeah.
So how did your knowledge of science, mathematics, biology influence your art? How did that all work together?
Yeah, it was in every way you could possibly imagine. My favorite creature was a fish. I'd have fish, somebody would be sitting in a setting like this and I'd have fish going by in the air. Kind of thing,
Right.
Just fun.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was the students' reaction when you had an opportunity to work along with them, say, in your art?
I think they had a good time. I showed them how to do it professionally. We did a lot of ink work, a lot of painting, and never had any problems. The kids were right there.
Right.
Yeah.
So very engaged.
They've got things to do. Yeah, they're not going to cause any problems.
Right.
I never had any problems with kids. Kids were great.
Right.
Yeah.
So what future projects are you working on, Bruce?
Just more. Just more. It's difficult as we get older. I'm 76.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to be in fairly good shape, so I can still do a lot of things. I just wish my memory was a little better, that's all.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
But your books, I know that you marketed them through the Creston Farmers Market for many years, had the books in some galleries and so forth, and you sort of stepped back from that simply because it's maybe not as interesting for you now as it used to be, but your books are still available in certain areas?
Yes, definitely. But another aspect of it too was when I was doing the farmers market, I was selling a tremendous amount of stuff, and I was doing big prints, and like there were days I would make over $1,000. I mean, I was blown away. I was doing really well, and but I was depending on getting my supplies from the States. And so I would go down to Port Hill every week to pick up the mail and get my supplies so I could do this. And then with everything that's happened down there, I just said, nope, I'm not going down there again. And that was it.
Right. So you just had
but that was another reason why. It was not just the COVID thing, but
just had to change directions.
Yeah.
I know Joe at Kingfisher Books fairly well, and he always displays your work quite prominently.
Yeah,
so.
Joe's been very supportive, very much so.
So just think about your career and all the things you've done, all the sketches that you've done of historical areas. Any favorites that sort of pop out that you would say would be noteworthy?
Gosh, no. Sorry. No.
Tell me
But
tell me a couple of your favorite stories.
The thing is too, when I was before I became a teacher, I was at Simon Fraser, and this is how I ended up in the Kootenays, because I started in Simon Fraser in '67, and there was a lot going on. It was just a fabulous time. And anyway, at that time, everybody was getting interested in digging for bottles and looking through midden piles, looking for old things, and the Kootenays and the old silver mines. It was really becoming quite fashionable and a fad. And we got together with my friends and they said, let's take some time off and do a little tour of the Kootenays. And that's what did it for me. So we went and we went through Castlegar Trail. We went to Caslow, went all through, ended up in Sandon and Cody. And I can remember driving up. You could do it then up to Cody, and the hotel was still basically in place. You could walk in the front door. There were chairs there. You could grab them. There were carts out in the front, just lying around. Just amazing.
Well, the Kootenays always has surprises. This summer we were camping at Kootenay Creek, and I drove up to the north end of the lake. In all the years I've been in the Kootenays, I'd never been past Caslow.
Oh, for heaven's sakes!
And so, I went up into the Lardo Valley.
Oh,
and,
beautiful!
And I was just blown away with the country and the scope of the country. It's big country up in there, and lots of history in that area as well.
Yeah,
have you ever done any sketches in that area?
Yes, not that many. I usually did a lot in Ainsworth, and I say up in the mountains around the Sandon and Cody. Oh, I have to tell you about what happened one day. Drove up, I got the first ferry. I was at the first logging mining road, got my trail bike out, away I went. I drove about 16 kilometers, went into a cirque, and I knew Sandon was on the other side of the ridge, and I started climbing. And I didn't realize how serious I was getting myself into, because I was literally doing the handholds.
Right.
I got about 1,600 feet. I figured I had about 10 more feet to get over the top, but it was an overhang.
Okay.
So there I am, and suddenly I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knows where I am. I'm about 1,600 feet above the ground, and I'm clean, and I can't even see where my handholds were to go down.
Okay.
So I had this wave of terror, and I just, okay, let the panic go. And I was hanging there for about 2 minutes, and finally I just said, okay, 1 foot at a time. And oh, what a ridiculous thing to get yourself into.
Well, you know, when that's probably indicative of the Kootenay experience. You know, you get yourself into those kind of situations. But I was up talking about the Lardo Valley. Just before you get to Lardo, there's a little campsite, and it's called the Lost Ledge campsite, I believe, right on Kootenay Lake.
Yep.
Spectacular setting.
Yes.
And guess what? Beautiful little cabin, log cabin that sits there, that was built by a trapper back in the early days. So if you're looking for one more cabin to sketch.
No, there's a few. You know, it's funny you should mention that, because when I started, I thought, oh, I'm going to be finished doing this stuff in a couple of years. You know, I'll have sketched everything there is to really sketch. I never even scratched the surface.
Right.
You know, there's so many other places to go and view and depict.
Yeah. Well, again, I want to thank you for, capturing those images, keeping them for, time going forward, because, when we look back at it, we can remember and reflect on that important history of the Kootenays. And the Kootenays, as you have so nicely illustrated today, a fascinating place.
Yeah,
to
endlessly,
live. Yeah. So let's just wrap it up, Bruce. I know you said that you're just continuing to do more. Do you do like commission sketches?
Oh, I've done all kinds of commissions. Yeah, I have, but I'm not interested. So, but what I want to do now is just do things that I really want to do.
Right.
I have a little idea of what I'd like to get done.
Yeah. So really look after your personal interests.
I'm doing one right now that I call Stupidity, and you'll see it.
Well, that could be a whole new episode. One thing I also admire about you is that you're obviously a lover of nature, and you spend some time in the Crescent Valley, just enjoying the nature. Yep. Just tell me what a typical day would be in your life. You're out for a hike on a fairly regular basis?
I go out to Summit Creek Park every day with my dog, and we do at least an hour and a half easily. And I've learned where all the trails are. First thing I do when I get there is count the cars, and I know where I'm going. Right. And the country around there is just amazing, and the wildlife in that park: elk, deer, wolves, coyotes, the birds. It's just amazing. It's endless.
So that kind of setting, does that give you inspiration?
Oh, it does. I just thrive off it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good for you too.
Yeah, no, good. Well, thank you so much for being a guest, and again giving us a glimpse into the past of the Kootenays, and also into your fascinating life, and the fact that you've documented many of it in your books and in your projects. So keep up the good work. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's been a real pleasure, Keith.
So our guest today has been Bruce Paterson. Bruce is from Creston, and we've had an opportunity to talk about his Kootenay Cameo series and much of his artwork. Thanks again, Bruce. We appreciate you being a guest. My name is Keith Powell, and this is Talking Kootenay Books.